Right, good afternoon. Small but perfectly formed group this afternoon. Just to let you all know that I am recording this event because we put them all out on the BIPC website for future reference. If you keep your cameras off and your mics on mute, unless you are talking, and we'll have a little recap at the end if anyone's got any questions. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Paul Foster from the FSB. Thanks for coming today.
Great, thanks, Ben. And hello, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen, if that's okay. So bear with me just a second. Can someone just let me know, is that okay, Ben?
Yeah, that's all perfect. Thank you, Paul.
Brilliant.
All good to see the screen.
Thank you. So, hello everyone. My name's Paul Foster. I'm one of the Northwest of England team at the Federation of Small Businesses. I'm the development manager for Lancashire and, more importantly, for this event, Cumbria. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. But first of all, just big thank you for inviting me today to Ben and the team at the Business and IP Centre, particularly with the opportunity to talk about this really important issue of tackling late payment and dealing with cash flow for small businesses. So just by way of background, for those who may not be aware, Federation of Small Businesses, FSB as we're known for short, we're a business campaigning and business support organisation. We're about to enter our 50th year of operating. So we were set up in the 70s initially to help people who were self-employed and very, very small businesses. The CBI had been formed a couple of years prior to us, and we were set up basically to be the voice of small business in response to that, to make sure that small businesses could be heard within government and could be supported to run their businesses. So that's a bit of our background in terms of who we are. The services that we offer tend to be around things like legal advice, HR support, a lot of things that will give you the security and peace of mind that you can go about the day-to-day running of your business without maybe knowing about how to deal with all those things that can crop up at any given time. So FSB is always there on hand to help small businesses to deal with any of those problems that might be occurring within the business. In addition to that, we do a lot of national campaigning. So most people that are aware of us who aren't members have heard of us in terms of our national work. So we do a lot of work with the government. We've been in to see the new Prime Minister, the new Chancellor in the last few weeks to talk to them about what small businesses' needs are. And, you know, we're very vocal nationally in the media on the support needed for people to run small business, because, of course, if small businesses are successful, they employ people. People do better in terms of their wages, businesses prosper, pay more taxes, and everyone is generally happier. So our role is to make sure that small businesses are supported. We cover the whole of the UK. As I mentioned, my role is Lancashire and Cumbria. And what I tend to do is be that kind of point of contact for small businesses, normally micro businesses with FSB, to actually make sure that they can access any support that they need. So I do a lot of signposting, but we also do a lot of information gathering. So obviously to have that influence in central government, we need really good examples of how businesses are working on the ground in areas like Cumbria and the issues that they're experiencing. So part of my role is to speak to businesses and understand what their challenges are at any given time. So looking at the issue of late payment, and what is late payment? Let's address that first of all. Well, as it does suggest, it's an issue that affects any business that doesn't receive payment for their goods or services at the point of sale. So late payment, and we'll come on to some stats shortly, late payment affects a lot of businesses that don't operate on a kind of receiving the income at the point of sale basis. So anyone that typically invoices or has to wait for payment will have experienced late payment to one degree or another, and we'll look at some of the implications of that and some of the timescales that we're talking about in just a moment. But why is it a problem? Well, particularly in the current climate, when businesses are finding things quite tough, cash flow is really, really crucial, and being able to have money coming in so that you can pay your bills is really, really important. So if you're suffering with late payment, you're going to be worried about whether you can pay your overheads, whether you can pay your staff, whether you can pay your suppliers, whether you can operate effectively as a business. So that is why it is such a problem. It also creates a negative mindset in businesses. They tend to be worrying about getting that money in rather than focusing on driving their business forward. And that then just generally holds back the economy. In terms of who it affects, it does affect a lot of businesses. Some businesses, as I mentioned, that operate on receiving income at the point of sale. So if you think of cafes, restaurants, people pay the bill before they leave. But in a lot of other sectors, people will do the work, send someone an invoice, and then at some point later it will be paid. And they're typically the ones that do suffer with late payment, unfortunately. In terms of when it's a problem, this is not a new problem at the moment, unfortunately. We've been talking to government about this for probably over 20 years now. Even in the days when people used to pay by cheque, you have to wait 5 days for a cheque to clear. So there were issues back then, but certainly in modern times when, through COVID and now the issues we have with inflation, cash flow is really, really crucial. So it affects everyone, but more so at the moment when it's difficult to get cash from other areas. Maybe your reserves are running low after a difficult couple of years. So it's more of a problem when the economy tightens. So the final point on this slide, just kind of an indication of where things are at the moment from the businesses that I speak to in Cumbria. So really, really key that they look at their cash flow, keep an eye on their overheads, and also making sure that sales are coming in. And of course, late payment is relevant in all those other areas. So FSB does a huge amount of research, and we publish a lot of information nationally, which we use in the media and we use in our discussions with the government. So I wanted to share some of that with you on this call. Poor payment practice and the impact on small suppliers is significant. So we know from our research that 1/3 of payments to small businesses are late. In terms of the impacts of those late payments, more than 1/3, so around 37%, have run into cash flow difficulties as a result of them not being paid in a timely fashion. So when we talk about cash flow difficulties and what that means for them, typically that means they can't pay their bills, and they could be utility bills, it could be rent, it could be staffing costs, but there will undoubtedly be a knock-on effect. And also potentially it could be banking charges if you go over an overdraft limit, for example. So there's an additional knock-on impact there in terms of what late payment into one business can do. I mentioned overdraft. 3 in 10 have been forced to use an overdraft purely because payments haven't come when they were due. So again, it just sets business back, really, makes them think less positively about how they're gonna grow their business. And 1 in 5 put a slowdown in their profit growth down to the impact of late payments. The cumulative impact of paying small businesses on time or not paying them on time, we've estimated at 2.5 billion as an average over the last few years in terms of the boost that the economy would have if people paid on time. As I say, that would then release more money within businesses who'd be able to do things more quickly, and you can see the pace of economic development would quicken quite significantly, we think, to the tune of around 2.5 billion a year. We also know a lot of businesses fail, and our research suggests in any given year it could be as many as 50,000 that would fail because of financial issues, in part driven by access to finance, cash flow and late payment. So it can be fatal for some businesses, unfortunately. From our research, again, the average value of late payment to small businesses is over £6,000. So if you're a sole trader or self-employed person, that's a significant amount of money, which is not in your pocket and should be in your pocket. Interestingly, 61% of small businesses are actually being paid late by bigger businesses. So really, businesses that can pay, they're in a position to pay because they've typically got healthy bank balances, but for one reason or another, they're hoarding this cash, they're not paying their suppliers, and we think that's fundamentally wrong. Another key issue we've uncovered is that 79% of small businesses don't charge interest on overdue invoices. Technically, a lot of them could do, but we think a lot of this is down to not wanting to damage relationships, concerns that businesses have around whether they'll get future work from any particular business they might be working with. And again, just the kind of aspect of that small business against maybe a bigger business, thinking, I can't really do that. I can't really justify charging interest. Although if the boot was on the other foot, I mentioned bank charges before, we've all been hit by bank charges when we don't meet agreements. So, it would happen. It would certainly happen the other way around, that interest would be charged on small businesses. We asked some questions around the length of time that late payments tend to be kind of not coming in for. So you'll see from this particular graph, sometimes it's less than 2 weeks, which for a lot of businesses is manageable. But actually, for the bulk of the payments that we're talking about, it's between 2 weeks and 3 months. And if you think again of that very, very small business, 3 months is a long time to be waiting for, an average amount of around £6,000 to come in. That's really going to limit what you can do in your business. And if you work in certain sectors like construction, where you've got to buy materials to do work, you could well be holding off starting a new job because your previous job hasn't paid you and enabled you to actually move on to that next opportunity. So for some businesses, it does actually stop them working. And there are unfortunately some horror stories of kind of longer term late payment of between 3 and 6 months, or even well over 6 months in some cases. Thankfully, they're relatively in the minority. And as I mentioned, the figures involved, a lot of the figures from our members that the smallest businesses report back to us are less than £1,000. But there are some as well that are getting up towards 5,000. And in some cases, it can be quite a bit more than that. But to every business, this is money that should be in their pocket. And, hopefully at one point will be in their pocket, but not having it in their pocket now is really limiting what they can do. Some additional kind of findings that we've found. This is our small business index for this year, the third quarter, and it really shows what this kind of impact has in terms of sales. So 50% of small businesses that responded to our latest survey said that sales have fallen in the last 3 months. 19% of them are looking at decreasing their staffing levels. That's not necessarily laying off staff. That might be just they're not able to give their staff as many hours, but certainly the demand for labour is starting to fall. 4%, a negative 4% have got falling investment intentions, when 12 months ago, it was a positive +13 score, and 62% have got general concerns around the economy, and 27% have got utility costs concerns. So again, a lot of financial concern here. So you start to understand why getting that money in can be so important. Confidence has plummeted for our businesses, our smallest businesses, in the last few months in the northwest of England. Is really a concern now. We're also noticing that nationally applications for credit are up, and this is actually borrowing for cash flow support, not for investment in a business, which does set some alarm bells ringing as well. Obviously, if a business can't balance its books, you can manage that in the short term, but borrowing for cash flow is not a great position to be in. However, for a lot of businesses at the moment, because sales are falling and costs are going up, this is just something that they're having to do. Late payment is exacerbating this problem. So the construction sector is one of the ones most hit by this at the moment. We're also hearing that small firms are reporting that late payment is getting worse. As I mentioned, it does tend to worsen as a situation when the economy contracts or tightens, because people tend to hold on to money. There's a slightly selfish view that, well, if I don't have to pay something, I'll wait a bit longer. The money's better off in my pocket. Bigger businesses have got the balances to be able to cope with that. Smaller businesses don't. They've not got the reserves, and it can be a real problem for them in terms of survival. How does this look in terms of how businesses individually are impacted? I just wanted to give you some anonymous case study type information of businesses in Lancashire and Cumbria that I've spoken to in the last 2 or 3 years. The first of which was a Lancashire-based caravan components business. So they manufacture some of the interiors which go into caravans. Quite an established business, been trading for around 15, 20 years, got quite a few staff for a small business, 15, 20 staff. They manufacture, it's quite niche what they do. And they've got a number of established caravan sales businesses, if you like, that they supply into, and they've supplied into successfully for many years. One of these particular businesses that they supply into at one point, just prior to COVID, owed them 120,000 in what became late payments. Now the small business wasn't particularly concerned about this because they'd worked with this bigger business for a while. They knew they tended to get paid by them. There was just sometimes delays that came about, and they couldn't really complain about the bigger business in the wider sense. But then COVID hit, and this £120,000 was still owed. And the finance director from the bigger business contacted the smaller business and just said, "I'm sorry, we're just not in a position to pay you at the moment. We've got concerns over our viability as a business going forward. We've got our staff to pay. We're going to have to put some staff on furlough." The whole future of the bigger business was put into a little bit of doubt, and therefore they just basically said, "We're not saying we don't owe you the money, but at the moment we can't pay you that." Now the impact on that smaller business was devastating. They didn't go under, thankfully. They managed to just about keep their heads above water, but that just gives you an example of what can happen in a worst case scenario when late payment, is hit by an additional issue such as the pandemic. Second case study, this is the Cumbrian business, a small printing business which provides kind of brochures, marketing literature, flyers for slightly larger businesses. Again, working with a handful of larger businesses, not always great payers, but nothing particularly to worry about. But then they noticed at a certain point, I think a year or two ago, that everything just seemed to take a little bit longer. So payments that were taking maybe 3 or 4 weeks to come through for work that had been agreed were now taking 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks in some cases. They tried to follow this up with their contact at the business, and they'd found out that contact had left, which actually turned out to be part of the problem. So some changes in staffing, and then subsequently some IT changes that this slightly larger business had undertaken, had meant that the processes and the procedures that they were going through to get their suppliers paid had changed, and everything was taking a bit longer. But the smaller business wasn't aware of this to start with, and it just carried on supplying them, not realizing that they were effectively working at risk of not being paid. Again, there was a positive outcome on that. The smaller business survived, but just brought into focus the need to kind of have that regular contact with people that you're supplying to make sure that you're aware of any changes they might be going through, which could impact on your business as well. The final case study, again, a Cumbrian business, a very small construction business with just, I think, 2 or 3 employees, working on a larger government contract with a couple of larger SMEs who were the main contractors. So you get quite often in construction these situations where money will filter down, but quite often the small business is at the end of the chain in terms of that supply chain of activity. And some people think the term supply chain bullying is a little bit strong, but effectively if you're at the end of that chain as a very small business, it's very difficult to force that bigger business to kind of play fair with you, to release money when it's due. So we do, as FSP, we do refer to some of the issues that occur in this particular type of scenario as being supply chain bullying. So we had a situation here with a small construction business and a bigger business that they've got an agreement with, saying, yeah, we'll pay you when we get around to it, and there's not really much you can do about it. And they basically had to sit and wait. And the threat, there was an implied threat of, if you don't like it, we'll find someone else that will do it instead of you. So it was that kind of bullying of the slightly bigger business saying, do it our way or the highway, really. Now, I've mentioned invoice issues with this because quite often there can be a situation nowadays where with invoice discounting, and this applies to within the public sector as well for smaller businesses. Sometimes you can be told that you'll be paid within a certain amount of time, but you'll only be paid at 90% or 95% of what was agreed, which we think is wrong. We don't think that should happen. We think an agreed price should be an agreed price. But these types of agreements of invoice discounting are starting to be seen more and more as a way of people getting paid more quickly. But we don't think that that is a viable long-term option. So I mentioned FSB as a campaigning organisation. What are we asking the government to do? The first thing is around the prompt payment code. So you might have heard of this. This is a national initiative to encourage the biggest businesses in the UK to actually sign up to paying all their suppliers within a given time frame. It's been in the media quite a bit over the last few years because a lot of large businesses, some of them the bigger retailers, have signed up to it and then changed their payment terms. So they've kind of paid lip service to it. And unfortunately, we don't think it's quite strong enough at the moment. We don't think it's really got teeth. So we'd like to see that payment code strengthened, and we think the government can do something in that area. The government have also appointed a small business commissioner to work on some of these issues for small businesses. So that's an independent arbitrator effectively to look into some of these issues and liaise between the small business and the larger business, where the small business maybe doesn't have the wherewithal to do some of that themselves. And we think, again, there's more that can be done there if we can strengthen that commissioner role and give them a little bit more power. We think there's things that can be done around technology advancements and innovation. And I'll come on to some of this shortly, because this is also potentially some of the solution for this difficulty. But we think the government should be encouraging activity to look at technology as a way of solving this problem. And we think also naming and shaming some of these poor practices will drive improvements, particularly in some of the bigger businesses. But what steps can individual businesses take? Let's look at invoicing first of all. So if you're in a sector that relies on you doing the work or providing the goods and then invoicing your customer, at which point they will at some point, fingers crossed, hopefully pay you, what can you do? So our best advice is to have a clear discussion up front with that business. Make sure that you understand what their reality is, how they tend to pay people. Are they using an electronic system? Do things have to go through 4 or 5 different people to get signed off? Get a very clear picture, if you can, as to what the situation will be. And also make it clear to them, what you're looking for. If you need to be paid within 30 days, then make that clear to them. And don't think that you have to bow to their terms. Too many smaller businesses get tied into things, and they think they're so pleased to have won a contract with a perceived bigger business that they forget to actually make sure that it works for them. So make sure that it works for you as a small business. In terms of the payee record and reputation, there's actually quite a bit you can look up online now, whether it's through Companies House to look at a business's finances, or whether it's through a service that the government have got to look at particularly on large businesses. A lot of that information is online at gov.uk. You can look up, for example, some of the major retailers and look at annual accounts for them with the percentages of invoices they pay within 30 days, 60 days, etc. And they provide that information. So some information is there to allow you to assess the people that you might be working with, to make an informed decision as to whether or not it's viable for you and your business. So we think making use of that information is really part of making sure that you make the right decision at the outset before you start working with a potential client. Having clear parameters and that personal contact. So, understanding that process, but also knowing the individuals that are working within the business that you're supplying to. So does Joe Bloggs sign something off, but then someone else in finance needs to access it? Do you need a contact in both so you understand where things are at? We would say that's probably a good idea if at all possible. So again, if there are staffing changes at any point, you can make sure that you've got the contact details of the people who can keep you informed as to where things are at. The thing to avoid is, obviously, when you're working on an invoice basis, submitting an invoice and then thinking, well, I hope it gets paid next week, but it might be weeks and you just sat waiting and you've got no idea where it's up to, or even no idea if it's been received at all or accepted. One of the biggest delays, or one of the biggest causes of delays, is quite often where there is disputed work. So whether it's the person you're supplying saying, well, I'm not sure it was done to the standard we agreed, or you've not quite done it the way that we agreed, and quite often it's the lines of communication that need to be agreed and ironed out. So we always suggest following up to confirm receipt of an invoice, and just check what the timeline's looking like in terms of the processing of that, and ultimately when you're likely to get paid. Other things that you can think about as a business, though, more and more businesses are requesting prepayment, whether that's full prepayment or whether it's part payment for goods and services secured. So, not having to rely on completing an entire piece of work before getting some money in for that work. That is happening more and more often. So don't be afraid to explore with someone that you're providing or supplying to, whether that is a possibility for them. If you don't ask, you're not likely to get the answer, but give it a go and see. That might be something that is worth looking at. Also find out, what with the businesses that you're working with, have they got e-invoicing, smart software? Is it something, if you email something across, that will quickly go onto a system and be signed off, or does it have to be passed from one person to another as literally a piece of paper within potentially a larger office? Because the smarter the software is, and if they've got e-invoicing, the better chance there is that it'll be a slick process and you'll get paid. And there are also things that you can use in terms of your finances to make sure that you can submit things in a way that might be compatible with those systems that the businesses you're working with are using as well. So technology advances are definitely worth looking into. A lot of businesses now that might have worked on cash basis before, but also some others that may have invoiced are using payment terminals. So the chip and pin machines, you can get these either as permanent fixtures that plug into a space within an office or a unit, or you can get ones that are mobile based, and they obviously just allow kind of immediate payments to be made once goods and services are provided, rather than having to go down that route of waiting. There are also some smaller businesses, sometimes in the personal care sector, where they might not have the payment terminals, but they might be quite happy to give someone their BACS details. And again, we've all got mobile phones now, as we've got internet access. You can do your online banking, you can make an instant payment to someone quite quickly. From an individual banking point of view, obviously making sure that that's a business bank account will help with any HMRC concerns. But again, that is something you might want to consider as a small business. One other thing to mention in terms of particularly the construction sector is something called project bank accounts. And this is an initiative that's developed in the last few years, and it helps those businesses further down that food chain that I outlined before to get paid more quickly. So with a project bank account, if we take the construction example, the money for that project is set aside, and once certain targets are hit, money is kind of naturally released to the people that have done the work, without that kind of paper trail having to be passed from one person to another. So they are working quite well in some instances, and are possibly things that could work with a little bit of tweaking in other sectors as well. In extension to this, I just wanted to mention one of our members in Lancashire who set up something called Keystone. So Tim Mullett, one of our members in Lancashire, construction industry expert. He's been working in the sector for a long time, and he's seen firsthand the difficulties that tradespeople have had with their customers in terms of getting paid for work done. And also making sure that the customers are happy with the work done. So he's developed a web app which basically formalizes some of that agreement, and it also releases money at certain points of things being achieved within a domestic environment. So it means that as a tradesperson, You potentially don't need to complete an entire kitchen fitting or bathroom refit before you start to get some of the money in from that. It's obviously agreed by both parties at the outset, and it's just a really good example of how technology can help to address some of this. So there are a number of businesses using that kind of support nowadays. Just a couple of other things to mention. So if all else fails, you may well be needing to look at debt recovery. So if you've invoiced and it's not kind of been paid within 6 months, so you've got payments that are overdue for over 6 months, you probably need to look at a more formal resolution. So FSB, we've got a service which is free to our members around debt recovery. It's a full kind of end-to-end support service for our members. Starts off with a contact centre which members contact to tell them what the problem is. We've then got a range of kind of professional support that's available, a letter before action that can be sent out on your behalf, which is a very soft reminder to the business you're working with, which says you owe us this money, you know, just want to check where it's up to. We don't want this to go any further legally, but you know, we need to make sure that you're on with it. We've then got the support through late payment demands, which is more of a leak down the actual formal legal route. We have the support through this service as well to help you calculate any interest that might be due to you. So I mentioned earlier, a lot of small businesses are reluctant to charge interest on the services or goods that they've provided, but actually they could do. And this helps you to work out if you, for example, 3 months later, you've not been paid, whether you'd want to factor that in to your demand for payment. So it's a step-by-step support service, and it's now recovered in little over 18 months. It's recovered over £1 million for small businesses across the UK, and it's free as part of the service that we offer. So it's something we're really pleased with as a service. It's been very well used. Unfortunately, it's been necessary, but it has been necessary, and it's really done the trick for a lot of smaller businesses. So just in summary then, some of the key points that I've made through the course of the webinar. When a customer doesn't pay, they're hanging on to money that's yours. So chasing debt can be stressful, but you do need to think about it and progress with it as an issue. So the first steps are around having the systems in place to tackle late payments as quickly and as easily as possible. So following up non-payments with a letter, an email, or a phone call to remind customers to pay, and maintaining a good working relationship when you're chasing that debt. It's not about getting into arguments. It's just about making sure that the lines of communication are clear and everyone knows what's expected and what will be acceptable to you as the business that is owed money. If you've got a client that consistently pays invoices late, you need to think about whether you're prepared to continue working with them on that basis. Or do you want to think about whether for that type of customer, you want to ask them to pay up front? If you've got a net profit margin of 5%, recovering a bad debt of £1,000 is going to require additional sales of £20,000. So the money that you're not getting in is affecting you in various ways. Sometimes even with the best planning and the most insistent activity, some customers aren't going to pay on time. So cash flow can be impacted. And you've got to really think about your finances and probably keep in touch with your bank is a key issue there, to make sure that they're aware that there may well be an issue with your overdraft, but there is money coming in that they should be aware of, and that obviously, hopefully, you're not getting penalised for the fact that someone else owes you money. It may be that you need to go down the formal route. As I say, there is the debt support service through FSB. There are other support services out there as well, which you can look at. So if it does come to that, do not be afraid to go down that route, because it is your money at the end of the day, and you're entitled to that for the work that you've done. So just the final slide from myself, details on the legal support that FSB offers and the debt recovery service you can view at fsb.org.uk. So thank you for your time. I'm just going to try and stop sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. It's always nerve-wracking when you go from sharing the screen and think you're just going to hang up on everyone. That was really useful. So thank you very much for outlining those points. It's obvious that there is no magic bullet for those that are owed money. But I think implementation of systems, like you were saying, is something I can definitely say worked for me when my time in business. But also the trends are the same. It was always bigger payers that were a problem with me. And in that was in a specific business where quite a few of my businesses had automated payment systems, which worked really well. And I sort of definitely advocate that. But yeah, when you are going to have to give credit out as a small business, it's kind of inevitable unless you're selling bread, but then also kind of like your infrastructure for getting the bread into for someone to give you the money straight away is probably going to throw up some issues. So being aware and being as much automation and forward paying as possible. But thank you very much for outlining that today, and thank you for at least alerting people, even though there isn't a magic bullet, as to what you can do to really try protect yourself as best you can, especially in the current climate. If anyone wants to contact us at the BIPC or get in touch with Paul, then feel free to go on our website. We will post this on there as well, so people can come back to this. And also details of Paul as one of our experts on residences on the website too. So thank you very much again, Paul, and we shall speak again soon.
Thank you.
Right.